Over the hills and
One,
One,
two, three, four.
oh yeah, four.
What if I told you that one of the world's most popular children's shows, which touched the childhoods of millions, may have been inspired by secret mind manipulation experiments? Today you'll learn the true macabre story of the Teletubbies, and I guarantee that after hearing this, you'll never look at them the same way again. But before we dive into this mystery, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell, because here we reveal disturbing truths that many prefer to hide. If you enjoy exploring the dark side behind what seems innocent, this is the right place for you. Now, get ready. Have you ever wondered why the Teletubbies, a seemingly innocent children's show, was filmed in such a strange, empty setting? Think about it. Where else have you seen a completely isolated place, with no trees, no other living things, just artificially perfect hills and a sky that looks painted? Behind those hypnotically symmetrical green hills and artificially blue sky lies a dark theory that few dare mention, but which is gaining increasing traction among independent researchers and former BBC employees who have finally broken decades of silence. They say Teletubbyland wasn't just a studio set, but a meticulously planned recreation of a real place, isolated in rural England, where decades earlier an experimental facility for children with severe neurological disorders had operated. But here's the detail that will make you rethink everything. This facility wasn't just any ordinary psychiatric hospital. It was part of a top-secret British military program from the 1940s, known internally as Project Meadowlands, a name that should sound familiar to anyone who's paid attention to the Teletubbies landscapes. According to accounts buried in old internet forums, many of which were mysteriously removed after 2015, the program was reportedly inspired by real experiments documented in declassified British Ministry of Defence files. Children were kept completely isolated from society, subjected to bizarre experimental therapies that included exposure to repetitive visual patterns, sounds at specific frequencies, and something the documents called controlled environment therapy, keeping them in artificially colored spaces devoid of natural stimuli, monitored 24 hours a day through devices that, well, looked a lot like television screens embedded in their clothing. Most disturbingly, according to independent researchers who have spent decades analyzing both the declassified documents and every frame of the Teletubbies, the show's creators not only knew these stories, they had direct access to the original medical reports. They decided to turn them into children's fantasy, leaving sinister clues scattered throughout every detail of the show as if it were an open secret, a confession disguised as innocence. Every visual element, every sound, every movement of the characters follows specific patterns that correspond exactly to the experimental methods used on those children decades earlier. Coincidence? Or was something far more sinister happening before our eyes, broadcast to millions of children around the world, without their parents suspecting a thing? What most people don't know is that Teletubbyland was filmed on a real farm called Sweet Knoll Farm, located in Wimstone, Warwickshire, England. But here's the disturbing detail. This particular region has a dark history dating back to the early 20th century. During World War I, this area housed a secret military medical facility where soldiers with psychological trauma were subjected to mental rehabilitation experiments. Declassified documents decades later revealed that questionable methods were used, including prolonged isolation, repetition of visual and sound patterns, and what the military called child regression therapy. Patients were kept in artificially colored, safe environments, away from any stimuli from the outside world. It's a bit of a coincidence that decades later, in the exact same location, a children's program about colorful creatures living isolated in an artificial world would be created, don't you think? The BBC itself has never officially commented on this connection, but retired BBC employees have admitted in rare interviews that there was something disturbing about that place, and that some crew members felt uncomfortable during filming. But the most shocking theory involves the real origins of the four main characters. In 1952, a psychiatric institution in Bulgaria recorded the deaths of four children under mysterious circumstances. Medical records, leaked decades later, described these children by very specific characteristics. One was obsessed with the color purple and carried purse-shaped objects. Another was fixated on the color green and displayed repetitive behaviors. The third was associated with red and had aggressive tendencies. And the fourth, associated with yellow, displayed extreme childish behavior. The children's names were censored from the documents, but their characteristics were preserved in the medical reports. Experts who analyzed these documents alongside the Teletubbies characters found eerily precise similarities. Tinky Winky, the purple one with the purse. Dipsy, the green one with repetitive behaviors. Po, the red one and the most energetic. And La, the eternally childish yellow one. Anne Wood and Andrew Davenport, the show's creators, have never denied or confirmed having access to these records. But interestingly, they both made documented trips to Eastern Europe during the show's development period in 1995. What were they looking for there? Why specifically did they visit medical archives from decommissioned institutions? The Teletubbies' language was never just baby talk, as the creators claimed. Independent linguists who analyzed hours of recordings discovered specific patterns that correspond to mental programming techniques developed during the Cold War. The constant repetition of phrases like "AO" and again follow specific sound frequencies that, according to neurological studies, can induce altered states of consciousness in young children. Even more disturbing, the phrase "uh-oh" is repeated exactly 47 times in each episode, the same number of experimental therapy sessions the Bulgarian children received before their deaths. The screens on the characters' bellies were not just fantasy elements, but represented the concept of continuous monitoring used in real psychological experiments from the 1950s. The creators themselves admitted in a 1998 interview that they wanted to create something hypnotic, and that they studied child attention capture techniques used in medical settings. Why would a children's show need medical attention capture techniques? And why were these techniques specifically designed to address severe psychological trauma? The answer may lie in the true goals behind the creation of the Teletubbies, goals that go far beyond simple children's entertainment. Noo-Noo, the Teletubbies vacuum cleaner, represents perhaps the most disturbing element of the entire series when analyzed from a deeper perspective. This non-human character who constantly cleans the environment and swallows lost objects is an almost literal representation of the mind-cleansing methods used in 20th century psychiatric institutions. The vacuum cleaner moves autonomously, without the Teletubbies' command, appears and disappears without warning, and has the specific function of keeping the environment pure and organized. This perfectly echoes the protocols of experimental institutions, where anything that could contaminate the patient's minds was systematically removed. But there's something even more sinister. Noo-Noo's design is based on a real device used in a British institution in the 1960s, called the memory cleaner, a device that used suction to administer sensory deprivation therapies. Employees who worked at this institution reported that the device produced exactly the same sound as Noo-Noo does in the show. Coincidence? Furthermore, symbolism analysts have noted that the arrangement of objects in Teletubbyland forms specific patterns when viewed from above, patterns that correspond to symbols used in mind control rituals documented in controversial psychological experiments. The creators themselves never explained why they chose these specific arrangements, nor why Noo-Noo had to be that exact shape and produce those exact sounds. Could they have been recreating something they saw in confidential documents from experimental institutions? When the Teletubbies premiered in 1997, it sparked controversy that went far beyond the usual pedagogical criticism. Jerry Falwell, an American televangelist, accused the show of promoting a hidden agenda, specifically focusing on Tinky Winky. But what few realize is that Falwell's criticisms were based on information he claimed to have received from reliable sources within the production. What were these sources? Why would an American televangelist have access to inside information about a BBC-produced show? Leaked documents years later revealed that Falwell was in contact with former BBC employees who had been fired from the project for breaches of confidentiality. What had these employees revealed that was so serious as to result in immediate dismissal? Furthermore, the Polish government also investigated the show, with child protection authorities declaring that there were psychologically dangerous elements in the episodes. The investigation was mysteriously halted after just 1 week, and all related documents were classified as confidential. In England itself, parents began reporting strange behavior in children who watched the show. Episodes of sleepwalking, obsessive repetition of Teletubbies phrases even while asleep, and documented cases of children who stopped responding to their parents while watching the show, as if in a trance. The BBC received over 3,000 formal complaints about these behaviors, but never made any studies or investigations public. Why hide information about the possible side effects of a children's program? There's one Teletubbies episode that was officially censored and removed from all reruns: The Lion and the Bear. On the surface, the BBC claimed the episode was too scary for children. But the truth behind this censorship is far more disturbing. The episode featured a sequence featuring a lion and a bear appearing menacingly. But frame-by-frame analysis revealed details the BBC never publicly mentioned. The animals' shadows formed specific symbols when projected onto the floor, symbols that correspond to subliminal programming techniques developed during Cold War-era mind control experiments. Furthermore, the episode's audio contained infrasonic frequencies, sounds below the threshold of conscious human hearing, but which directly affect the nervous system. These frequencies were identified by independent researchers as being identical to those used in controlled fear induction experiments in secret psychological laboratories. Most shockingly, children who watched the episode during its original broadcast developed specific phobias and recurring nightmares about elements that didn't appear visually in the episode but were encoded in infrasound frequencies. How could children fear elements they didn't consciously see unless those elements had been directly implanted in their subconscious minds? The BBC has never explained why it chose to include these specific frequencies in the episode, nor how it acquired knowledge of such specialized techniques of psychological manipulation. Employees who worked on the episode's post-production reported years later that they received very specific instructions about the audio frequencies they should use, but they never learned the origin of those instructions. After filming of the Teletubbies ended in 2001, the fate of Teletubbyland took a macabre turn that few know about. Sweet Knowl Farm, where filming took place, experienced a series of unexplained events. First, owner Rosemary Harding reported that farm animals began exhibiting strange behaviors. Cows refused to graze in the area where the Teletubbies house was located. Horses showed signs of extreme stress when brought to that specific area, and local dogs howled incessantly at night. Veterinarians were unable to explain these behaviors, as there was nothing physically wrong with the animals. In 2007, the area was converted into an artificial lake, but not for aesthetic reasons as officially claimed. Local council documents, obtained through transparency requests, revealed that the soil in that specific area exhibited unexplained chemical anomalies and that there were concerns about unidentified contamination. What kind of contamination? Independent tests conducted by local residents detected abnormal levels of chemical compounds associated with psychological experiments from the 1950s and 1960s, specifically residues of substances used in experimental behavior-altering therapies. How did these substances get there? Even more disturbing, tourists who visited the area before it was converted into a lake reported feelings of extreme discomfort, episodes of unexplained anxiety, and some even experienced auditory hallucinations, hearing sounds that sounded like children's voices crying. The conversion of the site into a lake was not just to preserve private property, but to literally bury evidence of something that should never be discovered. The most shocking connection emerges when we analyze the funding and support Teletubbies received during its development. The show received extraordinarily large subsidies from the British government, far above the norm for children's productions, through government departments not normally involved in entertainment. Specifically, some of the funding came from the British Ministry of Defence and divisions involved in behavioral research. Why would the Ministry of Defense fund a children's program? Declassified documents decades later revealed that during the 1950s and 1970s, the British government conducted a series of secret programs called Operation Mindbridge, which studied methods of mass psychological influence, specifically focusing on how to shape behavior from early childhood. Teletubbies were created just as these programs were being officially terminated, but independent researchers have discovered that they were actually diverted to civilian applications, that is, funneled into entertainment projects that could continue the experiments covertly. Anne Wood, the creator, had documented meetings with psychologists who had worked directly on Operation Mindbridge just 2 months before beginning development of the Teletubbies. The minutes of these meetings remain classified to this day. Andrew Davenport, the co-creator, had training in experimental psychology and access to research files that would normally be restricted to professionals with security clearance. How did a TV producer gain access to this kind of classified information? The answer may lie in the fact that the Teletubbies were not just an entertainment program, but the continuation of decades of government experiments in behavioral control and influence, now applied directly to an entire generation of children through television. Today, more than 2 decades after the Teletubbies premiered, evidence continues to mount about the show's true nature. Unofficial longitudinal studies have followed children who watched Teletubbies extensively during early childhood and discovered specific behavioral patterns that persist into adulthood: increased susceptibility to suggestion, a tendency toward repetitive behaviors when under stress, and a measurable neurological response to certain visual and audio patterns. The same patterns present in the show. More disturbingly, former BBC employees who worked on the production have a statistically abnormal rate of developing serious psychological problems years later, including severe depression, anxiety disorders, and in some cases, psychotic episodes that invariably include Teletubbies references. 3 key employees of the original production died under suspicious circumstances between 2010 and 2015, all apparently by suicide, but family members reported that before their deaths they had all mentioned secrets about the Teletubbies that they could no longer bear to keep. Anne Wood's personal files, obtained after her death in 2019, contained correspondence with military psychologists, 50-year confidentiality agreements, and cryptic references to Project Rainbow, a code name that appears in declassified documents about child mind control experiments. The program that marked the childhoods of millions of children around the world may actually have been the most successful mass experiment in psychological manipulation through media in history. And most terrifying of all, if it worked so well with the Teletubbies, how many other children's programs are actually continuations of these same experiments? The next time you see children completely hypnotized by an educational program, ask yourself, are they really learning or are they being programmed? The answer may be closer to reality than we'd like to admit. And if this story left you questioning what you once believed to be innocent, remember, this is just the beginning. There are countless shows, films, and even cartoons hiding secrets just like this one. So if you want to uncover the next disturbing truth they never wanted you to know, make sure to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join me in the next video, where the darkness behind the screen only gets deeper